Our country's 247th birthday, our 100th episode. I don't know which direction you're going to celebrate more, but or maybe it's just all a little bit too overwhelming to take in for one show. But we deliver here for the next 60 minutes with all of you. Hawkeyes Live, episode number 100. Corey Bratta here. Of course, he makes it all happen for us. Check out his daily work at From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, how are you?
I'm good, Mark. Calm before the storm. I took kind of a few days as another reprieve here because we are really counting down the days now. What are we, 60? I think we're like 60 days out from kickoff for Iowa, which means we're just a few weeks out from Big Ten Media Days. And then, of course, I mean, once you hit Big Ten Media Days, it's basically nonstop after that. You got camps starting. You've got your local media day. And you've got, like, for Iowa, they've got their open scrimmage in the during fall camp. So I've said it every time we meet on these Tuesday evenings, but man, the summer's flying by. So I'm excited about it. Boy, recruiting right now is in a pretty good place. Iowa has done a nice job with this most recent plethora of official visits for the 24 class. They also started their building of the 25 class with a nice prospect from within the state of Iowa. And I went back and not to go in a different direction already, Mark, but I went back. Sometimes I like to listen to this show on audio after we do it. And I actually think in some ways this show is better on audio. So if people are listening to this live, you may enjoy doing what I do because I enjoy hearing. I think you do a tremendous job as well, Mark, and I think your voice translates well to podcast format. But the thing about it is I was listening to our conversation and it made me go back and look at the in-state performances from Iowa and Iowa State, and I still cannot get over how much Iowa has dominated in the state in 2024. And the fact that Iowa State, according to 247 Sports, does not have a single prospect out of the top 12 in the state of Iowa, is that not odd? And should that not be alarm? Like, I don't follow Iowa State. Maybe we got to get our guy Levi on here. But that is a red flag. Unless they're just tearing it up in Texas and these other states that I'm not aware of. And I know they've gotten good prospects. It's not like they don't get commitments. The class isn't going to be bare. But man, I just think for an Iowa program, whether it's Iowa State, traditionally you have to compete on the recruiting trail within the state. And I don't know. I'd have to go back and reflect on previous classes. I don't know that Iowa's dominated like this since Campbell took over. This is very odd, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does. It is correlated to the awful 4-8 season that Iowa State had last year, despite the win over Iowa early in the year. And Iowa, of course, was abysmal offensively, but they still ended up 8-5, winning a bowl game. And Iowa State was at home, so I just can't get over that. As I mentioned, Joey Van Wetzinga, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. His brother Rusty is a fullback, walk-on fullback on the team. So Joey, a good prospect. They got him early, so he's the first official commit for the 25 class. An athlete, I guess. I mean, he's listed right now at 6'2", 255, and 247 Sports has him as a defensive lineman, and he's gotten some good attention. But boy, he didn't waste any time committing to Iowa. I know Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa State have all recruited him. And then, of course, KJ Parker, who we mentioned last week, part of the 24 class, he had not committed when we went live last week. And that's a good ad for Iowa. He was high on Cincinnati, had visited them earlier in the month of June. Iowa State had also been in on him. He's a Chicago wide receiver, 5'11", 165. He'll need to get a little bigger, but he's not the prototypical X receiver. So Iowa's got him on board. And then Joseph Anderson, an edge rusher out of St. Louis, who had a number of really good offers: Kansas State, Nebraska, Iowa State, Kansas, Vanderbilt, North Dakota State, Missouri. I mean, again, high major offers, not like powerhouse offers, but this is, as we say every single time we recap these recruits, Mark, these are the teams that Iowa needs to be beating out consistently. And for the most part, they've been doing that, especially for 2024.
So, Corey, just to be accurate, based on what I'm seeing in the 247 Sports list of 2024 commits for Iowa State, I am seeing the 8th rated player in the state and the 10th rated player in the state for 2024 on their commitment list.
For Iowa State?
Iowa State.
Okay, let me look at this because maybe they've updated their rankings. Let me look at this because give me just a second. I looked at it earlier in the let's see, Cody Fox.
I'm seeing Connor Moberly, 8th rated player in the state, quarterback out of Des Moines, 6'4", 195. And I'm seeing Dontrell Holt, an interior offensive lineman, the 12th rated player. I'm sorry, he's from Missouri. Keaton Roskop, the 10th rated player in the state of Iowa out of Marion, tight end.
You're looking at the 247 Sports composite rankings. I'm looking at just the 247 Sports rankings.
Okay.
So the composite, of course, is a combination of several different sites, including ESPN, I believe Rivals. I don't know that On3 is a part of that, but I don't know. But according to just 247's rankings, you've got Grant Bricks, Derek Weiskopf, Cam Buffington, Cody Fox, Brevin Dahl, Drew Campbell, Preston Reese Vanderzee, Jacob Simpson, Titus Cram, who is, I believe, still out there, and then Carson Brunn from Sioux City and Kyle Rakers, Connor Mobley, Keaton Rokup 13 and 14 in 247's rankings. So, yeah, I guess it depends on what you're looking at, but regardless of which one you're looking at, it's clear that Iowa State has, I would say, struggled. It's not like Iowa State has not tried with these kids. They've offered almost all of them. So Iowa's just beating them out a lot. I'm trying to think of the last in-state kid that committed to Iowa State over Iowa. I mean, they've had some in the 23 class, certainly. And I know what's his face out of Des Moines North flipped, the defensive end whose name escapes me, flipped to Iowa State kind of last minute before signing day last cycle. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious. You don't do a lot of Iowa State stuff on here. I know you don't have a regular guest, but I'd be curious to get a recruiting guy's perspective on that. Because, like I said, it's not like Campbell in the past has, been the type of coach that has said, well, we don't need the state of Iowa, which I think would be foolish for him to say. He hasn't said that. They have tried to recruit well in the state of Iowa. And like I said, if you look at just the 247 rankings, heck, Minnesota's got a Iowa player in the top 10. Looks like either Kansas State or Nebraska is going to probably land Grant Bricks, who's the number 1 player. I don't know what the latest on Titus Cram is. I know Iowa was in on him at one point. He's a running back, but listed as an athlete by 247 Sports. I know Duke offered him, and I believe Kansas State, Iowa State, Kansas, kind of the Midwestern schools. So, yeah, I don't know. But, these classes, they wrap up sooner than ever, Mark, with the early signing day, and kids make their decisions so early. And Joey Van Wetzing is a good example of that.
I also think that Big Ten schools are more prone to get their houses in order and sign their commitments on the first signing day and have those commitments locked in much earlier than what we see in the SEC. There is less drama among Big Ten schools for players and player flips than what we see in the SEC in particular on National Signing Day. So absolutely, that has been the case. Before we look at the 2 commits that came in over the past week, Corey, for the 24 class, you sent me something that leads right into what's being commented about right here from Tony about Iowa needs to sign more 4 and 5 stars. You sent me some information via College Football Report that Iowa has developed more 3 stars for the NFL draft than any school in the Big Ten during the college football playoff era.
So we are citing College Football Report on Twitter. They've got 7,200 followers. I am assuming, again, I'm careful because this could just be incorrect information. But according to this source, and sometimes social media is not accurate, but they listed 3-star or lower players drafted in the first round of the college football playoff era, out of the Big Ten. And what do you know? Iowa's number 1 with 6 3-star or less players drafted in the first round. That's a pretty impressive number if you think about it. First round. I mean, obviously that would exclude anybody who was early in the second round, etc., that have had tremendous careers like a George Kittle, etc. I'll say what surprised me at the list, and I'll get your point on this as well, was number 2. That's what surprised me off the list was Ohio State with 4 3-star or less star players, 4 in the college football playoff era that have ended up in the first round. That is astonishing to me.
This is astonishing for this reason. I'm not going to go through, of course, all the recruiting rankings throughout the entire playoff era, but let's just take one class. I'm going back a year to 2023, 23 or 22. In the 2023 recruiting class, Iowa signed 23 stars. Ohio State signed 1. They only had 1 3-star in the entire class.
That's what I'm saying. So when they go after a 3-star, they are identifying 3-stars well, and they are developing them. I mean, based on those numbers, can I just do you mind if I share this, Mark? I'll share the graphic so people can see
Absolutely.
what we're referring to, because I know maybe we understand it, but let me just share. Let me share this tab. So this is again from Twitter, College Football Report on Twitter. Hopefully everybody can see that. I'll zoom in here a little bit, but yeah, I this is according to 247 Sports recruiting rankings. So yeah, I mean a lot of teams with 0 recruits, 3-star or less, that have been developed and turned into first round prospects, and that includes Penn State, right? So, I don't know how to weigh this other than I'm impressed by the fact that, let me make this so we can get a little bit, there we go. I mean, what is your overall takeaway from this, besides the fact that it's impressive what Ohio State has done with a slim amount of 3-star players?
And once again, I'm glad you picked up on that, because that's the first thing that hit me. And just to underline that in a different way, I guarantee that Ohio State has signed the least number of 3-star players by far than anybody in the conference.
And Michigan's got 1. Michigan's got 1. Penn State's got 0. Minnesota, 0.
Most of those classes from those teams down at the bottom, Minnesota, Purdue, Nebraska, Rutgers, most of their classes are 3-stars.
Right. And so, I mean, and that doesn't take away anything from what Iowa has done. That the fact that they were able to get 6 players that are 3-star or less guys into the first round. That again, that's just first round. That doesn't mean, guys like Riley Moss, who didn't go first round, may turn into an excellent player. I mean, Desmond King wasn't first rounder. He's turned into an excellent NFL guy, and he was not a 4-star. So I don't know. I found it interesting. I thought you would find it interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a great bit of information. I enjoy those kind of compilations.
Are you surprised by Wisconsin at just 2?
Yes. Again, we're looking at first round and thinking that the Big Ten typically has 5 to 6 players drafted in the first, higher than that. I don't know what the average number, somewhere between 7 and 10 Big Ten players would be taken in the first round. So we're probably looking at somewhere in the range of 75 to 80 players during that time frame total. Yeah, I would think that Wisconsin would have developed, again, because their recruiting classes are much like Iowa's. The composition of the class between 5, 4, and 3 stars is extremely comparable.
So real quick, can I ask you this? The playoff era started is it 14?
Yes.
So the playoff era started in 14. And I'm assuming when it says here 247 composite recruiting rankings, when I go to Iowa football commits from 15 and I'm looking at the rankings and the star ratings, I'm assuming that is the composite rating. It doesn't say that, and I'm assuming we're talking about players that were drafted following the first college football playoff year, or players from the first college football playoff recruiting class.
Yeah, that can be interpreted a few different ways. So I don't know if they started with the first NFL draft after the college football playoff, which would have been in 2015, the NFL draft of 2015, and whatever players were drafted that year and since, or they are taking all the players that have been recruited and signed since the college football playoff era started in 2014. Those players were not eligible for the NFL draft until, let's say, 2017.
So let's if you don't mind, Mark, let's just look at this real quick.
Sure.
We can run through this quickly because we're obviously going to be able to say, yes, okay, this guy was drafted. So if you're just looking at 15 guys, so in other words, not guys that were recruited prior to 15 and ended up being drafted in 15, but just starting in that 15 class, I'm scrolling through here. None of these guys that I'm seeing in this class were first rounders. Anthony Nelson was a 3-star, has turned into a good NFL player, was not a first round player. Some of these guys I don't even barely remember. Michael Ojemudia, same thing. 3-star kid, was not a first rounder. So none in 15. Would you be able to guess? I mean, we can run through these years real quick. Would you be able to guess a few of these players? I mean, I could figure it out. TJ Hawkinson's one. Noah Fant is one. I'm trying to think of the number. I mean, basically all the first round guys. I'm trying to think of guys that have been drafted. I mean, James Daniels was a 4-star, according to the rankings we just looked at. I'm trying to think of how many guys they've had in the first round over the past.
So Jack Campbell was just taken in the first round, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Jack Campbell, Noah Fant's there. Monty Hooker was not first round. He's been a good NFL player, but so there's Noah Fant. That's one. Golston was not. Let's see, boy. TJ Hawkinson, there he is, 3-star out of Sheraton. I said Carroll last week, by the way. I apologize to the Hawkinson family. So yeah, 2 in that one class, and of course, same draft class as well. And Christian Welch was, of course, drafted not in the first round. We can look at 17. Just curious here. Epinesa was, of course, a 4/5, as was Tristan Wirfs. Hankins was not first round. Let's see. Trying to find somebody else here who was first round. Smith Marset was not first round. Geno Stone was not first round.
We're going to come up on Tyler Linderbaum the next season.
So we've got 2, and then in what do we have? 18 now. Yeah, Linderbaum, 3-star. There you go. So there's 3. Davion Nixon. Where was Davion drafted? Remind me. I should know that.
Was he that high? First rounder?
No, I don't think he was.
I'll double check.
Yeah, double check that. Boy, you still look at this. We're looking at the 18 class. We still got guys on this class that are on the team now, like Noah Shannon, Terry Roberts, of course. No, Kayvon Merriweather drafted, but not that high, as was Riley Moss. But hold on a second. Now I'm already forgetting. Riley Moss was not first round. Okay, but again, he was a 2-star gray shirt coming out of high school. 19. I'm guessing that maybe that's those 6 players, Mark, include classes prior to the playoff era.
Yes.
Draft starting in 15.
It must be the
we're going to run out of
NFL draft of that first NFL or college football playoff season. Yeah, Davion Nixon was a 5th rounder.
Wow, I don't know why I thought he was higher than it. So there's Jack Campbell right there. So that's, what do we have? 4? We're at 4 guys since 15. 2020. So
Linderbaum, Campbell, and the 2 tight ends.
We already
Didn't
named.
You have somebody else?
Yeah. No, Linderbaum, Campbell, and then the 2 tight ends.
Okay.
Isn't that we just said? Campbell, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody probably since then. Lucas Van Ness. I'm sorry, Lucas Van Ness. How do I forget about Lucas Van Ness? So there's 5. So I'm guess there was 1 from a class prior to 15 then that I'd have to stop and think about who would that have been. But yeah, I don't think there's been nobody since. And Cooper DeJean's probably going to be another one, although he was a 4-star, I guess, according to this.
Was Josh Jackson a first rounder?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Man, I should know these things. You probably remember drafts class stuff better than I do.
I used to. I used to remember everything like that. Used to is the operative word.
Yeah, 15, because he was a 3-star kid out of high school.
Yeah, I'm not seeing.
I'm looking at Ben Neiman. Looking at that. Think this is interesting to people, Mark?
Josie Jewell.
What year was that? What class was he part of?
13.
Okay. Wait. Was Josie first round?
I don't know.
I don't think he was. But you're right. I mean, he was part of that 13 class, and then I guess 12. Yeah, I don't know who else who we're missing there. So we're missing somebody. Of course, Kittle was not. He was drafted in 16. I suppose it could be somebody from the 11 class.
And you said Desmond King was not a first rounder?
No,
Okay.
I don't believe so. If my memory serves me correctly. And again, we're assuming that this information is correct from this college football source. But yeah, I don't see anybody. But I'm going back to 11 and now 10. So maybe Josie was. The chat's probably blowing up and we're not looking at it. But Carl Davis, no, he wasn't a first rounder. I mean, he's turned into a good NFL player. Kirksey was not first round. Hitchens was not first round. Boy, good players in that class, though. Yeah, I got nothing.
Jared, the actor, thank you so much for the contribution. Appreciate that, Jared. Congrats on 100 shows, guys. Go Hawks in 2023. What is your over-under in years left for Brian Ferentz as offensive coordinator and Kirk as head coach? Who is your best prediction for next head coaching candidate? Thanks. We hit this a few weeks ago, and I guess I'll go first here and say that my first prediction would be that the number of years that Kirk is around and Brian is around is the same number.
Could be, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Brian walks away after this year and Kirk sticks it out for like 1 or 2 more years. But I agree with you. I could see those things lining up. Over under for years left for those guys together, I'd say, boy, that's tough. I'd say 3. Over under 3 with 2.5, 3. He's got a contract through the end of 2029, so that's why I pause. We've talked about him maybe being done after 23, but again, I can't get over the amount of money he'd be leaving on the table.
And so that's the thing you always look at when a coach is meeting expectations and there's little doubt that he's going to be able to stay as long as he wants. And that's an oddity. That's a rarity. So hats off to Kirk Ferentz for being one of those few head coaches that can pretty much write the ending of his career. But yeah, that's a lot of money to leave on the table. But we've also discussed, as you just outlined, how well this season sets up and how difficult it looks going into the future. Although with Gary Barta's decision and him moving on, it seems as though Iowa, in regards to being an NIL factor and moving forward with that initiative and being a real player, has taken a real shot in the arm since Gary Barta moved on, or that he wasn't necessarily the best athletic director to be connected to those initiatives going forward. So maybe that was less Kirk than it is Gary Barta.
And we should clarify something, because several weeks ago when that news broke about Gary Barta retiring in August, that news, I think we both agreed this was great news for Iowa, and the next AD should excel at communication with Brad Heinrichs and the Swarm Collective, because it's such a big integral part of recruiting for the major sports. And I want to take that a step further. There needs to be more regular members of the Swarm Collective. I think they're still under 2,000 members. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe they're over 2,000 now. But that is unbelievably low. And the Swarm is a nonprofit, but it does go to athletes who want to get paid. And I know some people don't want to donate toward that. But if you want to be competitive at this level, Mark, that's how you be competitive in college football in this era. So I'm not telling anybody how to spend their money. But if you want Iowa to be competitive, this is not a sponsored plug I'm giving the Swarm. I'm just simply saying, those numbers are way too low. Put this in perspective, Mark. This channel we're on has got 2,500 subs. I think my channel's got around 5,500. That's, I mean, the collective, which I understand it's a lot easier to sub to a YouTube channel than give a monthly amount, but you can give a low amount that they cannot work off of that. And this is all interrelated because you go back to basketball and what I believe to be a lack of support from the big money people toward the basketball program because of, I think, in part, Fran McCaffrey and how he's viewed by some of the big money people. Football, especially with the transfer portal cycle, that everybody's excited about this past cycle, this past off season. People are excited about it in part because they had funds available due to big money people who dedicated funds to these individuals, and they've kind of been carrying the load. What I'm saying is the formal swarm collective that pays the players, you got to have more members to be able to attract across the board better athletes. Does that make sense? Like that's what's paying the individuals across the board, right? It's the other opportunities that Cade McNamara gets and Caleb Brown gets. That's a separate part of the collective. But the membership side of collective, the monthly donations that are occurring, as I understand it, that's the money that every scholarship player on the team actively gets. And I just feel like that number, yes, you can live off of big donations and big opportunities. Not really donations, right? They're supposed to be, opportunities, right? They're supposed to be NIL opportunities for these bigger name athletes. You can live off that for a few guys here and there. But I do think as time goes on, you need to be able to that number is going to go up for a lot of universities where every single scholarship player, a kid knows, hey, if I'm on scholarship here, I know I'm getting this fixed amount, and it's an annual amount or a monthly amount, whatever the case may be. And the fact of the matter is Iowa needs more members than whatever it's at, 2,000 members. So I'm not telling people how to spend their money, but I am concerned about that. And so to spin this back around to the Gary Barta situation, my hope is that whoever the next AD is, and I do think it'll probably be Beth Getz. I haven't heard anything to drive away from that notion. That AD really needs to promote. And they can promote. There's nothing wrong with the coaches and the administrators promoting the Swarm Collective. They can do that all they want. They can't give money themselves to the collective, but they can promote membership and they can promote the fact that it's in existence. I mean, we've hardly seen any active promotion, basically none from Gary Barta. We've seen some from Kirk and Fran and Lisa Bluter, but we've seen next to nothing from Iowa's current AD. That needs to change because it's not just the big money people that are a part of this. It needs to be the fan base as a whole. And there's a lot more people, potential members. I believe that there's a lot more potential members out there that have not yet signed up. And I think part of that would be helped by an AD who's willing to go out on a limb and promote it.
One of the major components of being an athletic director is fundraising, and that's always been the case. This is just another form of fundraising that I would think that anyone who has become an athletic director at this level is comfortable with. It's just in a different form, in a different way, being distributed differently for a different cause than they are accustomed to throughout their career, but it's still fundraising at its core.
And you know what? I still go back. This is my guess, and it's just totally a guess. I still bet that part of Gary Barta's reason, or maybe the main reason why he refused to actively promote the Swarm Collective and NIL is I really do think he was afraid of money being taken away from the iClub and donations directly to the athletic department. I really do believe that's probably what happened. And that's one thing, and I'm not saying it was all about his reputation, but I do think that's one thing people always fell back on with Gary. Well, he's costed Iowa this amount of money, and he's had this blunder with PR and with this coach and this program and whatever, Title IX, but he's a good fundraiser. We always heard that. So all of a sudden, if Gary Barta starts promoting the Swarm and that's hurting his fundraising numbers, then what's his stake, his claim staker, so to speak? You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I bet that's what happened, but that's just a guess.
Based on your knowledge of these collectives with Iowa, how transparent are they about the distribution of these funds? You had stated there about there being a certain amount of money that is evenly distributed amongst student athletes. And then other more prominent players, of course, strike their own deals. But how transparent are they about what percentage of money? There has to be administrative costs. There have to be some level of uh, money that doesn't go to the athlete. And even if it's an efficient organization, completely honest and upfront, wonder how much money of that goes to the athlete.
I just know Brad Heinrich, CEO of the Swarm, has said on numerous occasions that he's making nothing from this. So, but you're right. As far as there's cost of everything, right? And the Swarm has advertised. How dumb is this, Mark? The Swarm had an ad. They had their logo up on the Kinnick billboard last year. They had to pay it. They had to pay for it. Think about how delusional that is.
Think about
how delusional it is. It is complete. It's absurd. It's delusional. It's demented. It's idiotic. It's moronic. I mean, have you ever heard of something so dumb?
Well, yes, I have, but that doesn't take away from the stupidity of that. Yeah, just follow the money and the stupidity.
That would be, and think about that. Gary just done that, had he just said, we are going, and I'm not saying Gary was the final say on everything, but if he had just said, yes, we'll throw your logo up there for a quarter each game for free. I mean, like, he wouldn't have to say anything. All the fans see that. Instead, you're costing the collective money that the fans just donated. I mean, it's just absurd. I just, when I heard him say that, and what was it? There was another event where they set up a table and they had to pay. They have to pay for advertising on Learfield. That's a little different because Learfield is its own entity and Iowa has a contract with them to cover the games. But that's just incredible. The whole situation's incredible. And I think the advertising thing is the most absurd.
Yeah, as soon as he communicates that, then anyone who donates to that collective knows that a portion, regardless of how small, a portion of their donations went to the advertising that is serving and helping the athletes that are playing in that stadium.
And yet and I understand, like, if the Swarm wanted to put a billboard up on I-80 between Des Moines and Iowa City, okay, I can understand that. But you're gonna the university that the Swarm is basically working to support through the players, through funding the players, you're gonna charge that entity, that nonprofit entity. What a stupid situation. So, anyways, we can get off of this, but I just that's my soapbox on the whole Swarm situation, NIL and AD situation. And I've heard nothing more about the search for a permanent AD. I just know that Beth Getz will be taking over as interim here in about a month.
Jared, check out our last 2 or 3 episodes because we talked at length in regards to coaching candidates. Not that we can't cover this right here, but just to be brief, Corey, you can go ahead with your coaching candidates, whether those are your personal choices or what you believe is the most feasible and possible.
I mean, yeah, he says, who's your best prediction? So not my want list, but who's my best prediction for who the next head coach is? It would probably be either Mark Stoops or Brett Bielema. Right? I mean, I think Mark wants he wants the job based on what I've heard. And I think Brett would have a hard time turning the job down. Although I think the move from Big Ten school to Big Ten school would be a little awkward and a little odd, but it's happened before. And I think Illinois knows he's an Iowa guy. So it'd be one of those two guys. It's not Jay Norvell. It's not, frankly, I think it's probably not Phil Parker, even though that's probably who I would want. It's not probably Bob Stoops, even though that's probably who I would want Iowa to pursue first. There are other guys. Kansas State head coach whose name escapes me, Chris
Kleiman.
He's got connections. But again, my guess is if I had to put a prediction down, Jared, I'd say probably either Mark Stoops or Brett. But Mark is no young spring chicken either. I don't know. Depends on how long Kirk sticks around. If he sticks around through 2027 or 8, how would that make Mark? How old's Mark Stoops?
I would guess he's in his early 50s. That's a guess.
As you say to people, it's a Google question, so don't throw it up in the
Yeah.
chat. Uh,
And by the way, somebody did throw in the chat, and I verified Brandon Sheriff is the other
well,
three-star.
okay, but the playoff. Okay, you're right. If we're talking about it was that was a 2010 class, and he was drafted in the 15 draft. So that if that's how they set up these, then you're right.
Yes.
He was a 0-star according to 247, not the composite, but a 0-star according to 247 Sports. Think about that. And he just turned into a monster.
Yeah, it worked out for him. We also have, and I certainly, just to Jared, certainly recognize and acknowledge your question there. Again, we went at length a couple weeks ago, but Stoops and Bielema were at the top of my list, both as a want, but also as a prediction. I had somebody else in there that I can't recall that I threw into the mix. But Eric, we appreciate your contribution. Where is the ceiling for Iowa if Kirk retires and we make a quote unquote big splash hire a la Luke Fickle at Wisconsin? Can Iowa achieve top 15 prominence, top 10? Well, absolutely. It's been done under Kirk Ferentz. Sure, it can be achieved.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think, as you said, and I watched your preview video for Wisconsin this year. And honestly, I encourage all Iowa fans to go to your channel and watch that, because after watching it, I felt less confident about Iowa's chances to win the West. Not saying they won't win the West, but Wisconsin's schedule is almost as favorable as Iowa's. They have a weak schedule, Mark. Weak. Indiana and Rutgers, bad. Talk about bad crossover schedule. They do get Ohio State, but they get them in Madison. Iowa has to go to Happy Valley.
Yeah.
And what Iowa's other two games are Rutgers and Michigan State. So Wisconsin actually has the less difficult crossover schedule. I think some of the reason why I've favored Iowa over Wisconsin personnel-wise is because there's just a lot of unprovens with Wisconsin and a lot of provens with Iowa, right? Quarterback, coaches. You've got new coaches with Wisconsin, new quarterback, new wide receivers, all these skill guys coming in from the portal. Maybe they work, maybe they won't. So
the crossovers are comparable. You could argue that Ohio State's been, well, it has been a more automatic loss than anybody in the conference, of course.
Okay, but Rutgers and Indiana they're terrible. They're
sure. So they both play Rutgers. So cross that out. And you're comparing Michigan State, Penn State against Ohio State and Indiana.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the crossovers.
Okay.
That
Penn
both
State
Wisconsin and Iowa have.
Let's just cancel out Ohio State and Penn State.
Okay.
Because Wisconsin has to play them, but they play Ohio State at home, and Iowa has to play at Happy Valley under the lights. So cancel those two out.
I guess.
Well, what do you mean you guess? I mean,
Ohio State's been a much more dominant program than Penn State. It's not even close. Now, what's going to happen this year? I don't know. I get your point that one's on the road and one's at home.
You even mentioned during that video that Wisconsin has fared decently well at home against Ohio State. Okay, nobody fares well. Yeah, you have. You did. Should we pull it up? Should we pull?
They've lost like 9 straight.
Hey, listen, you're arguing yourself, Mark. You're arguing yourself. You said it during that video.
They've competed, but they keep losing. But they've competed in most of those games.
Although Iowa has won at Penn State, they've also gotten throttled at Penn State. Okay, and as I said, it sets up. I think where they play them, when they play them, is better than when Wisconsin plays Ohio State. I'm just saying, we assume both those games. Those are top tier teams. Those are top 10 teams. One at home, one on the road. Cancel each other out. Rutgers, you cancel out. Now we're comparing Michigan State and Indiana? Seriously? That's what I'm saying. Like, the upside of Michigan State, even without their...
Oh, there's a lot more upside with Michigan State. But last year, they were pretty comparable teams. And Indiana actually beat Michigan State last year. So I'm just saying that it's not that favorable for Wisconsin versus Iowa.
Okay. Indiana has been garbage since 2020. Michigan State went to a Peach Bowl a year and a half ago.
Yeah, that team's gone. They're gone. Well,
it's the same.
We're talking about legacy means something at certain places. Other places it doesn't. At Ohio State, it means something. Michigan State's, they're like a roller coaster.
But Tom Allen has proven nothing outside of the COVID season. So, and if he honestly
in the season before,
what?
And the year before, he went 8-4 against a tough schedule.
But if they suck this year, he's gone.
Sure.
And Mel
I'm not making a prediction on what coaches are going to stay. I'm just saying that there's not much difference between Iowa's crossovers and Wisconsin's.
Look at the last 2 years. Compare the records of those two teams of the last 2 years, Michigan State and Indiana. It's not even close.
Again, that Michigan State team's gone. They don't exist
now, Mark. But we're talking about also you don't think coaching staff has anything to do? You think it's just all personnel related? How big? What big type of
Indiana beat Michigan State last year? So if you want to talk about what happened when they played,
what happened the year before that?
That's less relevant than what happened last season.
All right.
Especially when those guys are gone. Kenneth Walker Jr. is gone. Peyton Thorne's gone.
I'm simply saying
they haven't replaced those guys at Michigan State.
I don't believe there's any argument that you can make that would imply that Wisconsin's crossover schedule is more difficult than Iowa's. If anything, it's less difficult. If you want to call them even, fine. But if anything, it's less difficult than Iowa's. And they have the same West schedule, and they get Iowa at home. That's the other part. They get Iowa up at Madison. So, I don't know. I just, as I looked at that schedule, I'm like, wow, both these schedules are cheesecake. That's why I'm all for the changes coming next year, because I think it's ridiculous. And usually you have either Iowa or Wisconsin with a tough schedule, and the other team has a weak schedule. Rarely do they line up like this. So I guess it's more fair than typical.
And I think starting in 2024, we're going to get more of what you desire. And I think most folks that want to see equitable paths to a championship bid, the schedules are going to be more equitable. You're not going to see these just cakewalks versus these gauntlets.
By the way, if there's a lot of dummies with the Michigan State Athletic Administration and the university, if the lack of confidence that you're displaying, and I see people in the chat ripping Michigan State, if you're all correct, and I mean, if Mel Tucker has another bad year, what a disaster of a contract extension that they gave him 2 years ago. Disastrous, because they signed him like he was one of the best coaches in the country. Also, the comment here, can I throw up a comment real quick? I don't know if we answered Eric's question. Sure, Iowa could make a big splash. Top 15 promise is possible, but it just depends on who's available on the coaching carousel at that time, and can they recruit?
I will just make this addendum. Will they live in the top 10 or the top 15? I don't see that. I think that's a difficult climb to maintain that. But can they be a fairly regular participant player in the top 15 in the country? Sure.
Okay, this comment from Mike. I'm sorry, and Mike's a Michigan fan, I know, but he's talking about why Iowa didn't allow the Swarm to have that ad up on Kinnick, possibly to avoid any appearance of impropriety. See, that's what they would say, but the facts state that's totally erroneous, because there are institutions, athletic departments across the country, like North Carolina. I mean, you just go down the list. There's so many, UConn, that have actively promoted. They have went out of their way to promote the collective associated with their school, promoted it. There's nothing wrong with promoting it. So, I mean, what's the difference between sending out emails directly from the University of Iowa Athletic Department or the UConn Athletic Department and having a logo up in the stands? That's not why. And he's going to use that. It's just like the argument from Gary Barta that, well, we never send out season ticket holder information to people because that's confidential. We don't do that. Well, why don't you do it? Right? Why don't you do it? Isn't that a fair question? Like, don't say you don't do it. Tell us why you don't do it. Because all these other schools are willing to do it. So why won't you do it? I just get so tired of the political answers that people like Gary Barta give to the media, and I'd love to press them more. And by the way, I'm still waiting on that Gary Barta interview. I know he did an interview with the University of Iowa for a podcast, and I'm still waiting on that interview that I wasn't promised it, but I was told that it was possible that it could happen. I've not heard back.
What I'm expecting, or what my expectation is for any athletic department, is to vet the collectives, to get to know them, to go through the personnel, to interview them, to be in close contact with them, to be able to be confident and that they are trustworthy, that they are capable, that they're competent at what they do, and then push them as soon as you know that they are reputable. Promote them. They are helping you. They are working hand in hand with you.
And I want to remind everybody of this. And I know it, some people probably think I'm being too hard on Gary because I brought this up so many times, kind of like we brought up the Brian Ferentz failures of last season, the year before, so many times. People got tired of that, but I thought it was worth repeating. It bared out being repeated. Let me make very clear the Gary Barta situation. Mark, do you know how many times since the collective was formed, Gary Barta has called Brad Heinrichs for anything? 0 times. 0. Do you know how insane? That's not just ridiculous. It's insane. It is insane. And by the way, I want to give credit to Kirk Ferentz, Fran McCaffrey, Lisa Bluter. They all have great relationships with Brad Heinrichs. Okay. They are not the problem. Now, one could argue that Fran McCaffrey's antics have hurt him. I've talked about that. I talked about that in the podcast I released here a few days ago. But as it relates to communication, according to Brad, last time we had him on the show, a month and a half ago, Gary had not contacted him, not called him one time. That is just, it leaves you speechless.
Okay, so my thought process about Gary Barta and what must have been going through his mind over the last couple of years since NIL was established is that either he knew, okay, I don't like this. I don't like this new world. I don't want to deal with it. I am planning my own retirement, my own exit strategy for my own personal benefit and my family. And therefore, he has not done right by the university and in the athletic department to fulfill his role and work his position to the best of his ability. In the meantime, you should work your role and justify your existence and your salary to the very last day you're on the job, and even beyond that to a certain extent. That's one thought process there.
My simple question to Gary Barta is, what's your problem, bro? Because the bottom line is what you just said. Like, if his stance on NIL is, well, I don't like this, so I'm going to retire. Okay. Who cares if you don't like it? You're not a coach. He's not the one recruiting. He's working as an administrator, and the coaches have embraced it. So what is it about it that you don't like, other than you're just stuck in your ways and you don't want to conform and you don't want to disperse power or perceive power to anyone else? I don't know what else it could be.
Every person that's listening or watching probably has a job that they don't like certain aspects of your job, but you signed up for it. And in this case, being compensated beyond what I believe anyone within earshot is being compensated, but that's part of the deal, is doing things you don't like to do.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find one-time transfer. I'm Googling this because there was a comment made. You probably remember this. I'm trying to find when it was. This was, May of 2022, Mark. May of 2022. And the first article that came up for me was an article from the Gazette. Let me see if I can pull this up. So this was an example, again, over a year ago. So he's went a whole year. He basically went a whole year before announcing he was going to be retiring. Iowa Athletics Director Gary Barta pursuing repeal of the NCAA's one-time transfer rule. And this is what he had said. So this is, in fact, let me, if you don't mind, would you mind if I share this, Mark?
Sure.
Might as well share it because we're talking about it and we're invested in it now. So this is courtesy of the Gazette. About 13 months after the NCAA approved a policy allowing collegiate athletes to transfer once without having to wait a year to play, Gary Barta is pursuing a repeal of the rule. He says, okay, if we can't totally control name, image, and likeness, then let's go back and put a 1 year. If you transfer, you can transfer. You don't have to lose your scholarship, but you must sit out 1 year because we can control that. What a stupid thing to say. What a stupid thing to say, Mark. I mean, and he used the word control twice. Basically, he's basically saying, well, we've always been able to control the narrative, control our athletes, control how this goes. So now we can't control. We're going to throw a hissy fit, and we're going to try to make it so that the athletes can't get what they want. We're going to try, and here's the other part of that, Mark. saying you want to repeal the one-time transfer rule, what is that going to do to your ability to recruit? Like, if you know that you're the potential institution that is pursuing you, I guess I can get rid of this golfing over here. Pursuing you, if the administration at said school is literally against being able to transfer, like that's something the players want. The players want the freedom to transfer and be eligible right away. And I'm fine with someone like Gary Barta or Kirk Ferentz, whoever, saying we don't like it. But you don't say that publicly. How dumb? I mean, seriously, you get what I'm saying? How?
Of course I do. And what I
that?
want to hear anytime there's a statement made like that, I want to hear. So we've got a new initiative. We have a loose set of policies and guidelines. We have, in this case, someone who's trying to control the situation and trying to control what they can't control. I want to hear, okay, this is your policy change that you're proposing. This is what you want to do that's different than the rest of college football. Why is this benefiting the university? Why is this benefiting the student athlete? What is the benefit here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and has that ever been answered?
I don't believe so. You would know better than I, but I don't believe so. No.
And the issue with with a lot of these, it's not just the NIL transfer portal situation and how Gary has handled that, but the PR disasters in general. A lot of time that just comes down to not communicating. Like when swimming and diving got canceled, the program got canceled. The word on the street, again, I was not in that meeting, but per reports, Gary Barta walked into the room with all the athletes and announced that the sport would be dissolved, and he basically walked out of the room without answering any questions. Like it comes down to not being able to communicate or not knowing how to communicate. And that should be, is that like 1A or 1B when it comes to being able to be in oversight or an administrative position, especially at a public institution with the program athletic department that generates this amount of money? Like that should be either job duty 1A or job duty 1B. And, if you can't communicate, that should disqualify you, in my opinion.
Either can't communicate or refusing to communicate.
Anyways, you want to talk about football, Mark? But before we finish this thing off, I can't believe we blitzed through almost an hour of this show just chatting about NIL and all this stuff. But I mean, it's still, as you can see, it still ruffles my feathers, even though I know Gary Barta is on his way out. I just, and for the record, if Gary Barta comes on my show, I'm going to be nothing but respectful to him. But I do think it's possible to be respectful and ask tough questions. And I don't have any fear of asking difficult questions. And not just because Gary, Mark, that's not just because Gary Barta is on his way out. I mean, it is what it is, but I would love an opportunity. I wish that Gary Barta would speak at Iowa Media Day, because I'd have some questions for him at Iowa Media Day. I'm not going to drive 2 hours and 15 minutes down for a random press conference, but if we can combine that with Media Day, it'd be great to hear from Gary. Unfortunately, Gary will have been retired by the time we hit Media Day in August. So we'll see if we get another press conference with him.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that they fulfill your request and you were able to get that interview. It will be a good one. Hawkeyes Live, folks. It's every Tuesday at 4:30 Central, 5:30 Eastern with Corey and myself. We've done this 100 weeks, so think about that. That's about 2 years. We will take you all the way through August camp and throughout the Hawkeyes 2023 season, and last chance to win the Big Ten Western Division, and all the good things that we present here on this show each and every week. Recruiting, schedule breakdowns, personnel breakdowns. We will look at opponents here soon. And of course, once we hit August camp, as Corey has outlined, it will be fast and furious. And the Big Ten Media Days are roughly a week prior to that as well.
What is this comment in the chat? But Iowa greater than NCAA national champ. What is this? What does this mean?
Considering the source, I could only try to guess.
Okay. All right. I don't know what this means, because Iowa defeated South Dakota State, and South Dakota State was won.
Maybe that's it.
The FCS national. Well, that's what you comment here. South Dakota State won an NCAA title. The FCS title. I guess I don't get the point there. Anyways, yes, please like the video, LFG. Thank you for that. Reminding everybody to hit that thumbs up.
Thank you. Yes, that helps the algorithms. If you don't know what that means, that just basically means that YouTube takes a survey of not just people, how many people watch the video, but how many people like the video, enjoy the video out of the people that watched it. And if that's a large percentage, then they are going to push that video, this live stream, out into more traffic and present that to more people. And that's what we all want, because we would like to be doing this 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, talking Iowa football with all of you. All right. This crossed my mind, and this has little to do with Iowa other than as a member of the Big Ten, because there are always Ohio State, Michigan arguments on all my shows, on all my channels that I don't start, but I see and then become part of them and then have to wage war against the combatants. And I think you're pretty comfortable and familiar with my approach to be measured and be fact-based and logical and so forth. I was thinking, who are the teams in the Big Ten? What teams have competed, and I mean competed toe-to-toe with and or won games against elite competition nationally in football other than Ohio State in the Big Ten? You have to go back.
Are you talking about non-conference? You're talking about?
I'm talking non-conference games, either in the postseason or in the regular season.
Well, Wisconsin's been competitive.
Against who?
I don't know. Go back, and haven't they had years where they played LSU and
not against elite teams?
Okay.
Nobody. Like, this hasn't happened for years and years and years. Like, the last team that I can think of is Mark D'Antonio's Michigan State team that won the Rose Bowl in 2013.
How good was the Notre Dame team that D'Antonio's team beat on the fake punt?
Oh, what year was that?
Was that that wasn't even Brian Kelly. Was that Charlie Weiss?
Those teams were terrible.
Okay. Well, that was
terrible. They were terrible for Notre Dame teams. They lived with 7 wins for a long time.
Okay.
But I'm just, that popped into my head as I was driving back from having an outing with a few people. And that popped into my head based again on arguments that have been brought to my attention in recent days. And I thought, this conference, my goodness.
Well, the Big Ten has won BCS games. So let's not act like they haven't. They've won New Year's Six.
Again, I'm talking elite.
Okay. Well,
beating elite teams, beating college football playoff caliber teams.
Okay. Well,
only so many happening.
There's only how many college football play? I mean, there's not many Big Ten teams scheduling Clemson, Georgia, and Alabama. So who else are we talking about?
Well, basically, it depends on the year. For that given year, an elite team.
Not really. Those teams have basically been in the playoff almost every year.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, they're not scheduling them. Secondly, again, I'm having to go 25 years back for Michigan, Penn State, and Michigan State would be the most recent.
Well, I'm
for what I would consider an elite team in a particular year.
Well, I know, but if we're looking at year to year, the Big Ten has won New Year's Six bowls. So, like, Penn State beat Utah last year. Iowa beat Georgia Tech in 2010.
Yeah, I'm not considering those elite teams.
Okay, well, they're New Year's Six. They're top 10 teams that year. That's why they're in the bowl game, right?
Yeah, yeah. Again, I'm talking about elite competition. It's been a long time. It's just been.
Didn't Penn State beat Auburn a couple of years ago? I know Auburn's not. I acknowledge it. I acknowledge it. I'm just saying there's few teams that you're going to be able to deem as elite every year, and even fewer teams that are elite from year to year. And you're right, the Big Ten doesn't play a lot of those teams. Like when's the last time Iowa's played a powerhouse? When's the last time Iowa's played Alabama, Georgia, or Clemson?
So to me, the last opportunity for Iowa would have been against Stanford in the Rose Bowl in 2016, 15, 16. That I considered an elite team, a
but if
top
Iowa
5 type team.
Okay, but if Iowa had beaten them, would you have called Stanford elite? I don't know that you would, because they would have had 3 losses. Georgia Tech, wasn't Georgia Tech a 10-2 team heading into 2010, the Orange Bowl? What's the difference? Because they had a dynamic guy in Christian McCaffrey. Just saying what happened in that game changes perception of how we view a team
it does.
Like Stanford.
But even with Michigan State beating Stanford and Stanford finishing with the record they did, they still beat a Pac-12 champion that was in the top 5 in the country. That particular year, I would consider Stanford to be elite.
Wait,
Michigan State got that done.
Michigan State beat Stanford in 15?
In 13. In the 13 Rose Bowl.
Okay. Yeah. And Stanford, Stanford was, for several years, was elite. It's not like they were a one-and-done team.
Yeah.
And for Mike, who says depends on if you call Utah elite.
No.
I simply said that because it was the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
You win a Rose Bowl, you're beating a team that supposedly is a top 10 team. And I would consider, out of 132 FBS teams, if you're in the top 10, I consider that semi-elite. Maybe not. I mean, there's another tier above that. I know you would argue there is, and I think you're absolutely right. But I'm just saying,
Yeah, I'm not discounting wins like that. That's who Penn State lined up against. It's a great win. You're playing in the Rose Bowl. But Utah lost 4 games last year.
Yeah.
That, to me, they're not elite. They're really good. Again, I know I'm going to the very top of college football, and I'm discounting a lot of really good wins. And the Minnesotas of the world should not be expected to beat those teams. They don't play those teams. They don't, because they don't schedule them, nor do they run into them. So there's only a couple teams that run into them because they either schedule them or they reach that level in postseason play.
And Iowa has not run into one since, besides Ohio State within the conference, Iowa's not ran into a non-conference power since 2016, the Rose Bowl.
Yeah. And before that, in my estimation, you'd have to go back to USC in the Orange Bowl.
Yeah.
Just an observation I made. Or maybe the LSU team that Nick Saban on the Hail Mary.
I think with the schedules made up the way they are with Wisconsin and Iowa this year, there's a decent chance that one of those teams will get an opportunity at one of those big-time wins, whether it's in a playoff game or in a New Year's Six game.
A playoff game?
Well, I'm just saying.
Wow.
I'm just saying. I'm not saying listen, don't read into what's going on here, all right?
You made the statement.
Okay, I made the comment several weeks back that 11-1 is plausible for Iowa or Wisconsin. And I think it's slightly more plausible for Iowa given personnel and the schedule. Iowa's going to be should be favored in 11 of their 12 games. It should be. As of right now, well, the Wisconsin-Iowa game, that's the one that I would put a little asterisk in. I still think Iowa on a neutral field would be favored against Wisconsin, given the changeover. But that game is a little later in the season. So again, it's on the road. Maybe I shouldn't say 11 of the 12 games, but I do think for sure 10 of the 12 games, and there's a chance that they're favored on the road at Wisconsin. It's just rare that you get that at Camp Randall. But I'm just saying at 11-1, they'll be in the same position they were in 2015. If they're 11-1 going to the Big Ten title game, if they win the Big Ten championship game, they're in. Okay? I don't care I don't need to hear anything else about what happens around the country. If they win the Big Ten title and beat whoever's in the championship game, and they win 11-1 regular season, which means they'd be 12-1 Big Ten champions, they're in the top 4. Okay? So that's what I'm saying. I don't think you can dismiss the notion. Not saying Iowa's going to be elite. I'm just saying Iowa was not elite in 15, and they were like one play away from making the college football playoff. So this shapes up to be a possible repeat of that. They've got the quarterback like they did in 15. They've got the defensive back, cornerback star like they did in 15. Desmond King. This year it's Cooper DeJean. I mean, the teams are very similar. They had obviously solid linebackers, but they were also coming off a year in 14 where they were not very good at linebacker, and they were getting better, but they went through a weird stretch there where they weren't very good at that position. And Iowa's obviously been really good at linebacker, but there's question marks about Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, the transfer. But I'm just saying, Wisconsin, the same thing. If they go 11-1, and their one loss being to Ohio State, and they beat Iowa at home and take care of business in the other games where they're probably be favored in 9 or 10 of those games, then they're one win away from the playoff. And frankly, Mark, you and I, 2 seasons ago, we dug up conceivable. I don't care what any Michigan fans say. We dug up conceivable scenarios in which Iowa, with that abysmal 2021 offense, could have made the playoff. They were in the playoff race during championship weekend. They were in the playoff race, and several things went their way. I'd have to go back to remember. I don't think they would have made it even had they beaten Michigan, but they were like 1 or 2 results away from being you win, you're probably in.
They were a couple results and about 42 points.
I know. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying they were closer than we thought.
You're right. We both came up with scenarios, even without communicating to one another. We looked over the situation and came to the same conclusion practically on the same day, and contacted each other and said, yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. I've done the same thing. Look at this. If that happens there, that happens there. And it wasn't completely crazy.
No, it wasn't.
No.
And several of those things happened. One of the big things that didn't happen is Iowa needed, they needed Georgia to beat Bama, right? Am I right in saying that? Or am I have that backwards?
Yes.
And Bama won easily.
Yeah. They needed Georgia to make it a one-team SEC entry.
One of the games they needed help with was Oklahoma State and Baylor. I think they got that one, right?
Yes.
They needed Oklahoma State to win. I correct?
Yes. No, they needed Baylor to win, and they did. That knocked out Oklahoma State.
I'm just saying, can you imagine how bad had they played Georgia in the national semis? Can you imagine? I'm just saying, you make a playoff, and that would have been the playoff committee's biggest nightmare. That would have been their biggest nightmare if they were in that position. Can you imagine them sitting there? Oh, what do we do with Iowa? That would be the reaction, and maybe the notion or obviously the perception of Iowa changed drastically last season. So in 21, it wasn't quite as drastic and severe, but they were still terrible on offense. Had they beaten Michigan, maybe there would have been a different opinion out there. And again, at 11-2 Big Ten champions, I think it'd be hard to keep them out. They would have had a win against a top 5 Penn State team. They would have had a win against a top 5 Michigan team on a neutral field, and 11-2 Big Ten champions. It would have just been hard to leave them out.
So we also, in that scenario, were drawing a lot of conclusions that would have favored Iowa in the perception of the playoff committee, because Pitt won the ACC 11-2. Baylor won the Big 12 11-2.
Okay, but the Big Ten is perceived a lot differently than those two conferences.
True.
It just is. We basically knew Pitt wasn't making it. We basically knew Baylor was not making it.
And we basically knew Iowa was not making it.
Well, okay, I shouldn't say we basically knew that, but what we had said was, if this happens, this happens, this happens, then the committee has to choose 2 of these 3 teams. An 11-2 Baylor, an 11-2 Pitt, 11-2 Iowa. If I recall, that's what we were up against. And maybe like an 10-3 Oregon. So that
Utah
was
won. Yeah, Utah won the. I think they were 10-3. They were done, but they won the Pac-12. So the Pac-12 was done.
It would not have been a shoe-in, but we were looking at those results and basically saying, if the committee has to pick 2 of those 3 teams, how can the Big Ten champion not be one of them?
Yes. Sure. I came to the same conclusion you did, except for I can almost guarantee if we go back to the playoff committee's rankings going into championship weekend, they had both Pitt and Baylor ahead of Iowa. Iowa was out of sight, 21st or 17th or whatever the number.
Well, but there also has to be something said for beating Michigan in the Big Ten championship game and what that does compared to beating Oklahoma State, even though Oklahoma State was a really good team. Whoever Who did Pitt beat? North Carolina?
Wake Forest.
Wake Forest? Yeah, I mean, there's just a different perception of beating Michigan. So, anyways, that I guess that conversation doesn't really matter. But one final question before we log off, Mark, can I ask you, if Iowa's let's go back to 15. Let's imagine with the playoff, it's still a 14 playoff until next season. Next season, right? 2024.
24 is the 12-team playoff.
Yep, 2024. So let's assume Iowa's 12-0. Let's just play that game for a second.
Yeah.
If they're 12-0 and lose to Ohio State or Michigan in the Big Ten title game, which means they will have beaten Penn State on the road, beaten Wisconsin on the road in the regular season, beaten Iowa State on the road, beaten Nebraska on the road, do they get in at 12-1 as non-Big Ten champions? That would be a sticky situation. It was pretty obvious in 2015 that they weren't getting in, although it was still close. The ACC title game that year, had that gone a different way, Iowa may still have gotten in. And the schedule was perceived a certain way that year. Like they didn't have a Penn State on the road that year. That schedule was really weak. But do they get in if they're 12-1 non-Big Ten champions?
Well, there's a huge gap in your information. I have no idea what's going on in the rest of the nation.
I know.
In the playoff committee's rankings prior to the postseason in 2021, prior to the championship game, Iowa was 13.
Okay. Yeah.
So their 11-2 would have bumped them past BYU, Michigan State, Oregon, although Baylor was 4 spots ahead of them. Ole Miss not playing, Ohio State not playing.
Done. 11-2 Big Ten champion leapfrogs Ohio State and Ole Miss that aren't playing for conference titles.
That might have brought back into play Notre Dame, though, 11-1.
Without a conference title again. Here we go. Not an opportunity to lose a conference title because they don't want to join a conference. So if I'm in playoff committee, I'm not saying they would handle it this way, but I'm assuming that they lose.
But they have a better record.
I don't care what their record is. I'm assuming that they lost.
Well, it matters what their record is because when they've had the better record, they've made the playoffs twice.
Listen, they have chosen not to play in a conference championship game.
Your argument's not flawed, but it's the wrong argument. We're not talking about what should be. We're talking about what the playoff committee would select.
Yeah, I don't know what the playoff committee would do. I'm saying, as a playoff committee member, it would be logical for me to say, you know what, and I've said this before about using incentive to try to get them to join a conference, and maybe the playoff committee has no interest in doing that, but I would punish them for not being in a conference, and I would say, okay, you're 11-1, but if we're comparing you to a bunch of teams that played in conference championship games, we're going to de facto put you in and assume you lost the conference championship game because you're deciding not to be in a conference, which means they'd be 11-2 and non-champions against an 11-2 Iowa.
Again,
it's a champion.
I'm not arguing with your thought process, but that's what it is. Your thought process, not necessarily their thought process. Right. You're also not going to want to hear this, but if Alabama loses to Georgia by a field goal and is 11-2 as a non-champion, they still may get in. They'd still probably select Alabama.
That's why I said at the time, Georgia needs to beat Alabama convincingly because Georgia was in no matter what. We knew that. And you're right. I remember saying that, but it would have been a travesty had Alabama gotten in at 11-2 non-champion. But I think most people would have said, well, they're the better team. But to me, that's not how we should be doing it. Like you say, it's not an invitational of who we think is better.
Well, it is an invitational is what it is.
It should not be. It should be based on a resume. Should be based on resume. And that's why the NCAA tournament selection process is better, in my opinion.
Well, the thing that is a safe zone for the NCAA men's selection committee is that you're selecting 68 teams. You can't screw it up. And if you screw it up, you're screwing up the bottom.
Right. Yeah.
And
so I think that's the idea. Expanding to 12 teams will lessen the controversy at the bottom. There will still be controversy. There'll always be controversy, but it will lessen it because you're ensuring that you have the top 6 to 7 teams in the country.
If you can't make the top 12, then
Yeah, who cares?
Don't argue about it. The
Right.
the power of the committee is going to shift from who's selected to who gets the buys. That's where their power is going to lie.
Yeah. Anyways, fun conversation, Mark. Fun conversation. 12-1. Last, you want to take a guess? 12-1 non-champions, are they in this year? If you had to guess. If you had to guess.
No.
Okay. I say yes. I say 12-1 as a non-champion of the Big Ten with a win at Penn State and a win at Wisconsin is enough to get them in.
And so if this happens, you're going to bring this back at me 6 months from now or whatever the time frame, and I'm going to say, well, I didn't have a context of what else was going on in college football.
Probably is not going to happen.
I need a scenario elsewhere.
Pretty hard to go 12-0. Here's my question: 10-2 Big Ten champions, which would make them 11-2. That's more feasible than all of this.
And beating a team that's most likely a top 3 or 4 team in the country.
Right.
In the championship game.
They didn't do in 21 that they would have been very close to doing with a terrible offense and a pretty weak schedule that year as well. I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting conversation to have.
Iowa and Wisconsin have both arrived at the Big Ten championship game undefeated and had the playoff right there in their hand and lost. Wisconsin did that 2 years later in 17.
The 15 will always haunt me as a sports guy. It's just to go 12-0, to have a perfect season, and then to lose a game in which you led in the fourth quarter. There was a terrible remember the targeting penalty that was not called when George Kittle got leveled helmet to helmet by a Michigan State linebacker in the end zone and ended up being an interception? That would have completely changed the game. Had the flag been thrown as it should have been, Iowa would have been a personal foul. Iowa would have been set up deep inside the red zone, automatic first down near the goal line. Would have changed the game. That's a touchdown. That's a touchdown. Instead, it was a turnover.
What's funny about, regardless of the outcome of that game, the best team in the conference wasn't at the game.
Yes. Yeah.
Not that they deserved it. They blew it.
Exactly.
The one game, they blew it.
They didn't deserve it.
They were the best team. All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here. Next Tuesday, bring a friend or 2 or 50. Why don't we have 500 people here next week? Bring them in for Iowa Hawkeyes Talk as we get closer to Big Ten Media Days and August camp. It's going to get even more fun by the week. So make it a date on your calendar. And again, bring some friends with you. Corey, do you have anything going on from the Hawkeye of the Storm?
Well, we'll start pumping out some more recruiting videos here over the next couple of days. And I'll be pumping out quite a few recruiting videos this month because that's kind of what we're doing now until Big Ten Media Day. Got some, a couple of 2024 guys that I haven't covered yet on the channel, including a couple of guys we talked about this afternoon. And then they've got the one recruit committed for 25 we'll talk about, and some 23 guys that have not done evals for. So we'll pump those out, and I'm sure we'll get more news. I don't think they're done. At official visit weekend reap some significant blessings, and I think, like I say, I think they'll get a couple more from that weekend. And who knows? I mean, I don't think based on last minute changes, there are still guys out there who could enter the portal this late, but it'd be pretty late to enter the portal. And we've talked about Iowa's limited scholarship count. So I think they're probably done there, but you just never know. Like the guys, we may hear stuff by camp, guys leaving and whatever. Guys like Grant Leeper. I mean, Grant Leeper, what's likely to happen, Mark, if somebody leaves before August is the Grant Leeper ends up with a scholarship this next semester, which would be fine. Good for him. I hate to see him have to pay out-of-state tuition for a semester, but yeah, we'll have a good time talking Hawkeye sports here over the next few weeks as we lead up to media days.
All right, everyone, make it on back next Tuesday at 4:30 Central. See you then.